I've read a lot of articles about credential stuffing in the past weeks, so I think it's something that is becoming very hot in these days.
Yeah, it's certainly increasing in frequency and number of companies hit, and in many cases, the companies that are getting hit are taking anywhere from 20 to 50 days to identify they are being hit before they can stop the attack. So that's causing a lot of problems for a lot of organizations.
Hi everyone, I'm Pierre from the Web Scraping Club, and this is Scraping Insights, a series of video interviews to key people in the industry. Today we have Nick Rieniets with us. He's the current CTO at Kasada, and we had a great talk with him about the anti-bot industry, its evolution, the current state, and its future scenarios. It was a great talk. Nick shared with us his experience in the field, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Below the video, you can find a link to the transcription and some other useful stuff. So relax yourself and enjoy the interview.
This interview is brought to you by databoutique.com, a marketplace for web data.
Hi Nick, thank you for being here. Thank you for joining the Web Scraping Club. I was excited to have you here because I wanted to expand our views about web scraping with someone that is on the other side of the river. So,
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, for the people who don't know you well, can you make us a brief introduction about yourself or your career in the antibot industry?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm excited to be here as well. So I cut my teeth early on in my career in the email security industry, and it's actually remarkable the parallels in the two spaces. In my view, they're both long-term unsolved problems. The last 5 or 6 years, I've been playing a key role in building out Kasada's detection platform and managing the teams that probably sit on the other side of the battle from the audience. And we've thought really deeply about what's wrong with the current state of bot mitigation, and maybe how do you think differently about it. And that's what I've spent most of my time doing as field CTO. I've got a reasonably broad remit at Kasada, so I could be out talking to customers, one day, and the next day I'll be, doing a review of the latest ML model on our detection platform with the team that's been running that. So, every day is different in my world.
Great, interesting. So, as far as I understood, you've been in the industry for quite a long time. And when do you think the blocking bots is something that websites needed to take in consideration? Was it long ago, or?
Yeah, I think you could probably trace it back to about a decade ago. I remember working with web application firewalls at the time, and the kind of the threat landscape, or the types of challenges that we were facing, started to pivot really dramatically. And the great challenge of defending and protecting against something like web scraping is that typically none of the requests are malicious. Like, they all look exactly the same as you and I would do in Chrome on our own machine, and that's that was the real thing. And I think that was mid 2010s was when the industry really started to bubble up. And if you look at the early entrants in the space, Distill Networks were probably one of them. Shape Security, undeniably. They all sort of started to form, I think, in the a little bit earlier than that. So, it's probably early 2010s would be the beginning of the challenge.
Yeah, I remember that in those days I started a bit earlier, and with my other co-founder of Data Boutique, we created hundreds of scrapers that were basically curl requests, and there was no protection at all, because anyone don't care about scraping. So that's
the interesting thing about scraping from from the defender's side is, it's not always obvious why a company would care about scraping, and many don't still. And so that's the challenge is typically the companies that have the content that you all want to scrape probably have a good reason to protect it now, and so the dynamic changes over time. And it seems to me that the evolution of AI has kind of motivated both sides to double down on scraping. Seems to be a lot of chatter about that this year.
Yeah. So you mentioned the different challenges for websites and anti-bot solutions. So what are the typical use cases where anti-bots are useful? Of course, I don't think it's only about scraping, but there are frauds, there are credential stuffing, and so on.
Yeah, look, I think we view the market in kind of at least 3 different communities, and each of the communities has their own kind of ecosystem and preference from a tech stack perspective. And so, alongside web scraping, we've also got, the hype bots, the sneaker bots. There's a very mature ecosystem in that space. Then we've got the more fraudulent actors, so credential stuffing, gift card cracking, carding in general, all the illegal activity. And it's typically the way we like to delineate is it's quite enjoyable for us to engage in the communities that participate in botting in a legal sense. But the opposite is true for the illegal side. And, most of the anti-bot solutions in the marketplace, I would believe, would generate most of their revenue protecting against the illegal aspect of botting. And if you look at the architecture of most of the vendors, that's certainly, the ATO cred stuffing space is very, very high on everyone's radar.
Yes, I've read a lot of articles about credential stuffing in the past weeks. So I think it's something that is becoming very hot in these days, or am I correct?
Yeah, it's certainly increasing in frequency and number of companies hit. And I spent a bit of time yesterday looking at some data breaches that have, the public data breach announcements. And, there's quite a few this year that have been announced. And what's interesting about it is, in many cases, the companies that are getting hit are taking anywhere from 20 to 50 days to identify they are being hit before they can stop the attack. So certainly a big problem for a lot of organizations. And like many, that ecosystem's moved to browser-based, bot, techniques. And they've got their own thing called Open Bullet, which is there's many variants of that, but it's like an all-in-one cred stuffing tool built on top of Puppeteer. And that's causing a lot of problems for a lot of organizations.
So let's go back a bit about to web scraping. So as mentioned before, I have been in the industry for some time, and especially in the latest 4 or 5 years, in my opinion, web scraping has become more harder and expensive on our side because there are more anti-bot solutions, there are more efficient anti-bot solutions. So I wanted to hear from you, how was the life on the other side of the river? I mean, how the anti-bot solution evolved in these 5 years?
Yeah, the way we view it, and this may not be the same for everyone in our space, but the way we view it is each type of bot that you would use, or each technique that you would use to build a bot, dictates a different set of characteristics that you need to build into your product. And so, the products that I would build and deploy to protect a browser-based web scraping platform would be very different to the one that I would deploy to protect against maybe a request-based, hype bot. The features and functionalities that you need to defend against those two things are very different. And indeed, there's a difference between building a bot solution to protect a login request versus a page load. Again, those two things are very different. And so I think one of the big challenges on our side has been, and this would be across the board for all vendors, is where do you spend your development effort? Like we've got limited resources in terms of developers and R&D, and indeed we've got limited resources in terms of where we focus our money, and so you've got to build the solution to be able to address both. And so I'm sure that some of the testing that you would do in your community using some of the browser-based solutions would create some results that would be very different if you were using request-based bots that the sneaker guys use, for example. So it's look, it's been a real challenge for us and continues to be so. It's an unsolved problem. I don't think anyone in our space has come out and nailed bot mitigation at any stage over the course of the last 10 years. I think the guys at Shape came pretty close, but that certainly seems to have digressed a bit, post acquisition, and in 2024. The evolution, there's a lot of sort of browser-based bots or sandbox techniques that are being used that are pretty powerful and keeping everyone on their toes, that's for sure.
That's interesting. That's one question always about the different illegal activities. So in your case, from Ivan, what is the proportion of illegal activities such as credit card fraud or account theft compared to web scraping among the action you block?
I would say on Kasada's side, the majority of our customers would be focused on the illegal activity, and I think that would be true of most. We've got a good cluster of customers that use us for web scraping, and some that kind of use us across the board for a range of different activities, and again that sort of requires different parts of our products to behave differently.
Great. So we talked about the evolution of antibot. I think that also in this case, there are things that didn't work that did work 5 years ago, but don't work today. I am thinking about CAPTCHAs. How do you, I've seen that different providers are creating their own solution, like Cloudflare Turnstile, the puzzle CAPTCHA of Datadome, or the press and hold challenge from Human. So I didn't see any solution from Kasada about CAPTCHAs. Is this something you believe is not correct, or you are not betting on CAPTCHAs, on this technology?
It's certainly something that we think we can differentiate on in the marketplace. Is we don't think that that you need a CAPTCHA in order to do bot mitigation. And if you actually strip what a CAPTCHA is down to its bare bones, really what the solutions are trying to do is they're trying to prove that there's a human clicking a button as they're collecting the telemetry, and ultimately that's just about trying to provide some sort of real-time validation that the data that they're collecting from the device was collected at that time. And so that's what the click the mouse or solve the puzzle or whatever it is that you want to do. That's its core purpose under the hood, is to try and provide some sort of protection from bots sending fake data. We don't believe you need a human to do that, and we've certainly built components into our client-side piece that give us that validation that the data is legit. Now, it's not bulletproof. No one has a bulletproof solution to that piece. So, but that's certainly one of our core beliefs is that CAPTCHA's on its way out, and I think the evolution of AI this year has really shown what you see now with all the puzzles is they get much harder, and it's significantly harder on the humans to prove that they're human. And I don't think that it's getting any harder for the bots to bypass either. So, it's a one-way battle in the wrong direction for human usage, and so we're very happy to try and provide an alternative to that.
Yeah, there are also all these CAPTCHA solving farms in some countries that are making basically useless traditional CAPTCHAs, at least. So
and they've kind of moved now from they were once click farms of people that were doing that. Now they've kind of automated that, and the sophistication of the solver space, be it CAPTCHA solver or even just antibot solver, is a really significant change in the marketplace over the last 2 years, and we've been tracking that. We got exposed to it very early on with the in the sneaker industry, and we now see that across industries. The really sophisticated anti-bot bypass services. It's definitely a trend that we've seen in the last couple of years.
Yeah, another trend I'm seeing is the trend of the web unblockers. I've seen that many proxy providers today are creating their web unblocker solutions where basically they try, in some cases, they achieve in bypassing any unblocker, an anti-bot solution. I was thinking, do you think that this is a threat for the anti-bot industry, or since it's something that is, let's say, regulated because you have an account on this proxy provider, so you have to pay. So basically, you are trustable when you use these tools. So is it something that you're scared of, or doesn't mind in your case?
I think the proliferation of these services is certainly something that keeps everyone aware, and they've certainly popped up everywhere in the last 12, 18 months. And there's varying degrees of sophistication in those tooling, and we certainly keep an eye on what they're doing and how they work. And again, it's like a spot fire in an industry, and you can imagine we've got 5 or 6 different clusters of problems that we solve for, and I think everyone would be the same. I think I'd speak on behalf of all the vendors to say that everyone would know all about what's out there, and whether they're able to manipulate their products in order to to address those threats is that's up to each individual vendor. We spend a lot of time on that sort of stuff, though. Like we keep we're very aware of your side of the fence, and that helps us tremendously just understand the ecosystem. And there are certain threats that we take more seriously than others, that's for sure. And certainly that's we look very seriously at the evolution of sophisticated anti-bot, whatever bypass solutions, morphing into the fraud space. Like that's a big transition that we look for.
I don't know, honestly, if these tools can be used for frauds, because you need to pay with your credit card. So unless the credit card is stolen and you've given fake credentials to the provider of the provider, you should be traceable if you commit some frauds. I've seen also that some providers are also quite strict on the websites you can target with their solutions. So I think it's
where we've been looking at this, though, is the CAPTCHA solvers more than the web unblockers. We've certainly seen there's a CAPTCHA solver known as CapSolver, funnily enough, and they were out deliberately marketing in all of the fraud forums, for bypasses for all the anti-bot solutions, and they definitely crossed a line, and we took a pretty upfront approach to that and sort of addressed the market. I think I have noticed that a lot of the web unblocker services do take identity pretty seriously. What I've also seen, though, is the people who do cred stuffing are pretty good at cracking all sorts of accounts, and it's not uncommon for them to go after the tooling that they need. So you'll often see them advertising accounts at VPN providers or whatever it happens to be in that space as well. So they've always got ways of getting their hands on things that they need.
Great. We have 2 more questions from the audience. Oh, this one, I don't know if you can answer. What percentage of bot you think you are failing to detect?
Yeah, it would be disingenuous for me to say none. Obviously, we're practical enough to know that you're not going to win every battle every day. For us, it's a matter of understanding the techniques that are being used that we're struggling to defend against at any given point in time, and understanding, well, what's the roadmap or the thing that needs to be built into the product to enable us to have the advantage. So we would look at that in different clusters. So, how do we defend against request bots that aren't executing in a browser? And there's a whole bunch of technologies that we deploy there, mostly around, client-side virtual machines and that kind of thing, to make that piece harder. Browser bots are totally different. So it comes down to anomaly detection largely, and that's the role of ML. And I'd say the entire industry is moving quite significantly in that direction, to try and automate that detection of anomalies. But as for a percentage, I couldn't tell you. It would change every day, to be frank, and certainly it would change for every customer.
Sure. Thank you so much. Another question from Ivan: why do some companies continue to use internal anti-bot technologies instead of adopting advanced commercial solutions? For example, Twitter still uses its own technology, where LinkedIn has switched to Perimeter X.
Yeah, a lot of the big tech companies don't like external providers, and so you'd look at Meta and Facebook as the same thing. Like, they believe that they've got their own technology, and they've certainly got the skilled engineering teams to build and maintain that. I think Twitter do actually use a variation of Arcos Labs to do their login piece at least. LinkedIn, from what I understand, will take a feed from a number of different providers, and these big tech companies all run their own ML models, and what they're really looking for from external providers is to feed more data to put into their ML model. And we do a lot of that for some of our customers as well, where the context of what sits behind us in the customer's application can be a really powerful signal. And so oftentimes combining those two data sets can give you a tremendous advantage.
Great. Yeah. Probably it's also a matter of cost. Maybe I'm thinking about maybe smaller companies that, I don't know. Maybe it's not a matter of cost anyway, because of course you need to pay the engineers for your solutions.
Well, look, I mean, antibot solutions are not cheap. That's certainly one thing to acknowledge, is that it's a difficult thing to operate, and we're effectively big data companies, and so that requires pretty big computational effort on our side. Most would charge based on the number of requests that a customer's, we're protecting for a customer, and for those really big companies like Twitter, that would be enormous. And so designing a solution to prevent bots on Twitter would be a really significant challenge, and and it shows. Like, I think they do you can definitely see botting activity through there all the time. And again, I don't think any of the companies that are doing themselves have done any better than the big vendors in the space. And I think TikTok are probably the ones that have tried to do the most themselves. I haven't really kept an eye on that, but they're the only company internally that have built their own VM, from what I understand.
Another question: do you also employ legal measure to block bots?
Some customers do. Yeah, some customers will do cease and desist, and that's part of their policy. And there's quite a lot of law cases in the US at the moment certainly around scraping and AI and that sort of stuff. That's coming to the front a fair bit. So we have from time to time provided data and assistance to companies that want to do that, but we would never do that on our side. That's not our thing.
Okay, great. So yeah, I think in the other cases you provide all the logs and data to their legal team, and then they go on with the eventually legal actions, I suppose.
Yeah. We've seen that from time to time, and I'm not sure how effective that is. It's not. I've never really looked at it, but there are certain companies that have significant issues associated with botting. It obviously involves being able to attribute back to who's writing the bot in the first place, and that's a challenge in and of itself. A lot of the times, as your audience would well know, it's pretty easy to be anonymous as you're doing this stuff. So that's the other challenge on that legal side as well.
Yes, and also, as James states here, it's also difficult for non-technical people to understand where these bots come from, what's their origin. So it's difficult also to enforce some legal actions to these subjects.
Yeah, there's definitely different industries have different things there. So, for example, in the like the travel industry, there's a huge amount of bots out there that are scraping the airlines. And as the airlines all move to dynamic pricing, it sort of drives the bots to be more frequent with their traffic, and that manifests into an enormous amount of traffic. And that is very, very attributable. Like you can see the bots that are targeting you as an airline. And so in that aspect, it's a little bit more obvious than it would be in content scraping. Generally speaking, there's no direct correlation between the content that you're taking and where it ends up, after the fact.
Yes, because you can also take a legal action. Depends also from the usage you make of the data, because let's say you're selling data protected by copyright. It's different than scraping data protected by copyright and then having this data only internally, so no one knows that you scrape copyrighted material, I suppose.
Yeah, it's really hard, right? And I even think I've seen some cases recently where they've looked at the training data set for a couple of the LLMs and worked out that there's a whole bunch of copyright material in there, and that's creating another problem in that industry. And ultimately it's a challenging thing. There's one subset of data that can be scraped that probably no one cares about, and another that people do really care about. And that's where we get involved is when companies realize the value of the data, and they for a range of reasons would like to make it harder for organizations to take that data.
Yeah. So I've got another question in the list. What are the general challenges involved in distinguishing between legitimate users and bots? You mentioned it before, but can you give us more details about this, the challenge from your side to distinguish bots and human?
Yeah, well, if you think about how you design a classification system to make that decision, ultimately you have to make a decision around false positives and false negatives. And so every customer would want us to optimize for the greatest clarity of detection and protecting the real human. And so as we design our classification system, we always have to understand the behavior of a natural browser, and then and basically be able to differentiate that from the telemetry we pull back from a bot. And that again, it changes depending on the type of tooling that you're using to hit us. If you're using a static solver and you're basically replicating it that way, it's a very different set of signals that we would pull from our data than if you're using Puppeteer Stealth or one of JS DOM or one of the sandboxing things. Ultimately, you've got to be really, really confident that it's a bot before you can take any action, and that's challenging for everyone. And as we all move to ML, and we're now training models to make those decisions, again, you've got to be incredibly confident in the accuracy of your model to allow it to go unsupervised as it makes those decisions. And we've seen a lot of teething problems across the industry of teams getting that wrong. And the big challenge with ML is when it gets something wrong, usually it does it at scale. And so it is something that everyone needs to tread very carefully with, and that's the problem in itself as well, I guess, is you've got to find the right balance between being aggressive and being conservative.
Yeah, I think it's something like balancing the negative and positive security, no? And because I think there are some industries also that are more sensitive to any false positive you detect, because let's say any false positive is one sale less for them, or there are more other industries. I think, let's say, the sneaker websites and so on, that their products are so requested that even if you're signaling some false positives, it's a it's almost okay, because people will go back and try again to buy the shoes. I suppose. I'm not.
Oh, look, I think every e-commerce platform would know exactly their revenue per minute, and anytime that you're causing errors, and every session that you're interrupting with a false positive has a dollar figure against it. Everyone's very much aware of that, and that is a big driver of all of our customers. But equally, everything that we don't stop it equally has a dollar figure against it, and be that an account that's compromised through an ATO or cred stuffing attack, or a bulk purchase of an item. Everything has a dollar figure, and our job is to find the right balance.
Yeah, one question again from the chat. Do you think that this cat and mouse game will continue forever, or there will be a certain point where it stops?
Look, we're a decade in. I refer to it as an unsolved non-stationary problem, and what I mean by that is, I could roll out a new defense model on the Kasada platform tomorrow, and there's no guarantee that model will be effective in a month's time, or let alone a year's time. And so it requires constant innovation from the defender's side in order to maintain efficacy. And so if you accept that, then the practical reality is that it is going to be a cat and mouse game into the future. And if I go back to my early career in the email space, we're three decades in to protecting email, and it's still unsolved. Market leadership in the email space has changed, 2 or 3 times in that 3 decades. And you've still got companies like Abnormal Security who are, innovating the market and disrupting the market share leaders. And that's the future I see for Antibot is, the shifts in the market in 2024 where, the early entrants are all kind of waning and regressing and losing focus. And it's the newer companies that have come up that are starting to become, starting to transition into market leaders, and, take some of that market share back, which is it's a fun game to play.
Speaking about the future, how do you see the AI boom we are living? Because from one side, we have more data to be used for train these models, and guess from where this data comes from the web. So more web scraping. And on the other side, we have also no-code tools powered with AI that are basically enabling new players to create their own web scraper with no technical skills. Is it a threat? Is a threat for you? Is it something you have to worry about?
Oh, look, I think it's interesting. I think both sides benefit equally from AI, at least this year. I think so. For all the benefit that we get as a defender by using AI to achieve enhanced anomaly detection, your side gets by being able to automate the collection of data, and really it's the browser telemetry stuff that I think is the interesting piece there. But yeah, look, the tooling. I saw one of your posts about the tooling. The AI scraping. It basically lowers the barrier of entry to scrape a website, and that's a problem for everyone. At least on our side of the fence, like it just becomes more prevalent. But ultimately, the companies that have got the best data are already being scraped, and they're already aware of it. I think there's a lot of fear in that segment around what an LLM could do with their data and what danger that has for their business. It's more of a business risk than a technical risk. You see companies like Stack Overflow and Reddit in particular have kind of were the canaries in the coal mine of that space where their data set is tremendously advantageous and interesting to most AI companies, and so therefore they bore the brunt of the first wave of scraping.
Also about AI, another question here. We've seen significant improvements in parsing data HTML with LLMs. Do you think there will be major advancement in antibot technology beyond the current use of XGBoost or CatBoost?
Yeah, look, I think I think I can only really speak to what we're thinking about there, and for us, it's about we think a little bit differently to the rest of the market in the way we look at particularly AI as a tool to be used. And I think most of the market through the the last 5 or 6 years is focused very much on behavioral activity. I'm not convinced by the interest of that data set moving forward. I think there's significantly greater value in looking at deeper data sets that you can extract from a browser. So the tooling, not really something that I'd be qualified to talk about. Our data science guys sit on the side, and I occasionally run into them at the water cooler, but I don't get too involved in what they're doing these days.
Understood. So we have also some questions from the email I've received in these days. What are the most common techniques that scrapers use to evade detection in your experience?
We bucket it into 3. Browser bots, Puppeteer, Playwright, Stealth, that kind of stuff. The sandboxing variants of that where, the scripts are executed but not in a full browser. So JS DOM would be a good example of that. And then request bots. Particularly the sneaker industry in particular, it's a religious argument on their side that you should never execute a bot bypassing solution in a browser. And so they will, they'll do everything to break outside the browser. Those 3 solutions require, significantly different components of our solution to work well. And that's the balance that we run with our engineering teams is to battle all fronts at the same time.
Great. And correlated to this question, what are the primary indicators used to identify botted traffic in general?
There's a range of different things, and so you can look at within a session you look at requests and patterns of requests, and we'll obviously look at all the the request headers and stuff like they're not necessarily great signals, but they can be useful. We'll look at behavioral data. That's a data set, and then it's the stuff that you're ripping out of the browser. Every anti-bot solution would do that slightly differently, but ultimately you're trying to work out, well, is this really Pierre in Chrome on a MacBook, or is this something that's running on Linux in a data center and just looks trying to look like that? And they're the big signals that we focus on, and it's always a combination of the 3 different techniques that you think about.
Yeah, so also browser fingerprinting you mentioned. It's quite a topic in the anti-bot industry, I suppose. I've read that there are more than 8,000 browser API inside Chrome, so there are a lot of signals to collect for detecting a human using a using a browser than a bot using a browser.
Yeah, and the challenge for us on our side is the act of collecting them has to be done in milliseconds, and so there's a limit of what you can collect based on what our customers will tolerate in terms of performance impact in the browser, and And so you've got to think really carefully about, well, which data makes the most sense and which has the best fidelity for us as a signal. And we would all be the same in that. The biggest issue with browser fingerprinting for most of the companies, or for many of our competitors, would be they struggle to maintain or contain that script in a browser. So it's somewhat easy to take one of their scripts and execute it outside a browser and just feed the data back to the classification API, and that's a huge problem for the industry. Those of us that have moved to VMs have tackled that largely. Again, it's not a silver bullet, but it gives you a huge advantage.
And in your experience, is it more difficult to detect bot traffic in a website with a low traffic or a high volume traffic website like Amazon or something like that?
Yeah, look, it depends on what you're protecting. And so, hiding in lots of traffic obviously seems to make sense as being an easier thing to do. But it all depends on the power of your models and how you're looking at the traffic. And usually, I'd imagine most people would do the same thing, is you're breaking each request into, or each session, and you're looking at it that way. And, that maybe manifests itself in a lot of people doing single request sessions. And that's another signal, that presents itself somewhat differently.
Okay. And one last question from my side. How do you stay updated with the latest trends on the bot detection? It's difficult, I suppose, because there are no open material on the web.
Well, you'd be surprised. So we do spend a lot of time in and around the communities that in the botting communities, and we do keep our finger on the pulse of different pieces, and we've got an intelligence team. We've got people who have come from the botting industry that work for us in our R&D side, or in our intelligence side. So within Kasada, we've got quite a strong knowledge of the ecosystems, and with that, all the tooling that you guys would be looking at, we're already kind of across. Now, there's a lot of stuff that gets done custom that we're never going to be able to see, but generally speaking, we would think that we've got a reasonably good view of things that come to prevalence. And the emergence of Playwright or Puppeteer Stealth was probably a good example from a couple of years back, where that popped up, and it took our industry a number of years to get across it. And we think we probably got it faster than most, and it's just a matter of we've got people who are very comfortable reading source code of bots and reverse engineering that back into the signals that we need to find in order to detect stuff.
And one question from the chat, one last question, I think it's from your marketing team. Why should I choose Kasada over Datadome or Akamai?
Well, I think my advice for anyone that's looking at anti-bot would be, you got to start with the problem you're trying to solve. Not everyone develops their solution in the same way. I think for me, if you look at the regression, progression trends in the marketplace, and you look at, well, who's building things differently or thinking differently about the space, I certainly think, your Datadomes and Kasadas of the world are at the more cutting edge of anti-bot. I respect greatly what they've done. I think the CDNs, and this is not specific to Akamai, I think, they've got a really tough job in that, they've probably got 10 to 15 different products under one company. And because anti-bot requires constant innovation, constant R&D work, constant engineering work, I think it's really difficult to maintain a consistent focus on that over years. And some of these products have been in the marketplace for 10 years. I think it's really difficult to cost justify that. On the Kasada side, we're thinking really differently about the problem. We are 100% dedicated to anti-bot. Like, we don't have any other thing that we contend with from an engineering perspective. We've started to win some really fun customers, and that's the best bit for us is, solving problems. And our teams love when we're up against a really tough bot. It's great to dig in and think really differently about it, and it's the closest thing I've come to playing a video game, but it's work, so it's fun.
Great. I think we have finished. There's no other questions, so I would like to thank you for all the time you gave us for the precious answers to our questions, and that's it. Thank you, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks, Pierre.